Hey there, everybody. We all love to get into the outdoors when the weather's fine, but getting out into nature means that we don't always get to pick the weather that we get when we're out there. Today, I'm going to be talking about some common sense things that you can do and things to keep back of your mind when you're out on an adventure. These tips can help keep you and your family safe, not to mention your expensive gear in one piece when you go on a trip. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Dirt Road Tourist, a podcast about overlanding where we focus on the places you find on the way to camp. I'm Ken, and we aren't overlanding to find the most difficult off road trails. We're seeking out the delicious food, the people, the culture, and sometimes the oddities, the America that you can only find when you leave the interstates behind and get out into the country. We'll talk about gear, camping tips to make your life out here more comfortable, interesting places to see, and vehicles that get you out to the good stuff. Join Susan and I to hear what we discover next on this episode of the Dirt Road Tourist. So, greetings, fellow tourists. Glad you could join me here for this, the 9th episode of the Dirt Road Tourist. This is the week of Thanksgiving 2024, and I want to wish everybody a safe and happy holiday. I hope the turkey isn't dry and that the political discussions don't lead to things being thrown around. I want to begin with a little bit of news here. There is a Facebook group for the Dirt Road Tourist. Yes, there is a Dirt Road Tourist Facebook group. If you're on Facebook, you can log in and search for the Dirt Road Tourist, and we are there. I want to invite everybody listening to definitely come in and join our group, and please bring your friends on in too. We are also on Instagram. You can find us at the Dirt Road Tourist on Instagram. And I definitely invite you to like and follow the podcast and other socials. These things, doing the likes and follows definitely helps other people that might be interested in the podcast find me. Lastly, if you want to leave a review, definitely please leave a 5-star review for the podcast because this definitely helps us come up in searches on the Apple Podcast platform. And lastly, if you have some thoughts, comments, stuff that you'd like to hear me talk about, perhaps, you can send me an email. I'm at ken@dirtroadtourist.com. That's ken@dirtroadtourist, all one word, .com. So this week I'm talking about the weather, or things that you can do to help protect yourself against the weather. And I kind of want to set this up by talking about a trip that we took out to Ocracoke here in North Carolina back in December of 2021. And if you remember that month in 2021, that was the time when they had the tornadoes. That front went through Kentucky and it spawned a whole bunch of tornadoes up there and really tore up that state. Well, that front was scheduled to continue through, and it went off the coast that night later on that evening. And we were camping down at Ocracoke. So we were expecting some rain. We didn't think it was going to really get that wild there at camp. And this was back when we still had our Smittybilt Gen 1 on the 2018 Tacoma that we had at the time. And we set up on the tent side of the campground. And there were a handful of other campers out there. There were some people that were camping in tents. There was a van lifer out there and a couple of other people. So we set up, and the wind the wind really didn't start there until about 11 o'clock, about when we were getting ready to go to bed. And that's when the rain was starting. And we had, yeah, a pretty good bit of rain overnight. But when we went to bed, the wind was really kind of coming in from the backside of the tent on the passenger side, so it wasn't that big of a deal because it was the tent was able to really kind of redirect that wind, and it was coming into where it was very, very stable. But what happened was overnight, as that front moved through, the wind came, it shifted around, and it was coming in from the other direction by about 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And our rooftop tent was kinda taking it in the teeth right there on the side on the end where the door is. And if you're familiar with rooftop tents, they have a deck that folds out. The floor of it folds out in half so that you have this part that's kinda suspended out over the side of the truck. And the wind was coming right up underneath that deck, and it was trying to kind of fold the tent up with Susan and I inside it. So it was, I woke up because I felt the tent actually starting to fold up, and it was the deck was hopping up down around our feet, and I heard a clunk. I heard a kind of a loud clunk outside. So I got up out of the blankets there, and it was kind of chilly that morning. And I looked out of the tent, and what had happened was the floor had popped up because of the wind, and the ladder to our rooftop tent had folded underneath. It was the base of the ladder was resting against the rear wheel of the truck. And that meant that the roof of the floor of the tent couldn't go back down because the ladder was propping it up. But worse yet, it meant that I didn't have a ladder to work with because it was angling inwards at that point. So that kind of left me with this basically a one-story leap out of this tent because the floor was kicked up out into darkness because it was still pitch black at this time. So I knew that I needed to get out of the tent and kind of be able to at least stabilize it because with the floor kicked up at that angle and the wind still coming in really strong there, that there was a good chance that it was going to completely just flip the floor over and that we were going to get folded up in there. So tuck and roll, Ken, tuck and roll. I took my flying leap out of there and managed to get down onto the ground level, and I got the ladder back out and got the tent level again. So go back up into the tent, and Susan, she's still asleep. She's crashed out. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and she was not wanting. She was having nothing with waking up. So I tried to go back to sleep at that point, but what happened when the floor of the tent folded up, it also slacked up the tension on the rain fly on that tent. And one of the support bars, the little U-shaped support bars that holds the rainfly up, had come out of their pocket, and it had allowed the rainfly to kind of fly loose there, and it was flapping in the wind. And the longer this went on, the more concerned I was for there being damage to the rainfly on the tent. And was not an insignificant purchase for us, and I really didn't want to see the thing get damaged because it would have been hard, if not impossible, for us to replace it at that point. So I did try to go back to sleep, but by about 5 o'clock in the morning, there was enough light coming in outside that I was able to really kind of break camp at that point. So I woke up Susan. She still wasn't interested in getting up at that early of an hour, but I just looked at her. I was like, Susan, get in the truck. And she finally kind of got the urgency of the situation at that point, and she got down out of the tent and got into the truck. And I broke camp, got everything packed up, and off we went. But I learned one valuable lesson out of doing that is that if you have a rooftop tent that has the floor that folds out and kind of cantilevers out over the side of the vehicle, I learned to take a ratchet strap. I always keep a couple of them in the rig anyway, and I always hook a ratchet strap to the point there where the ladder attaches to the floor of the tent. And then I run the other end of the ratchet strap around one of the spokes on the factory rims there on the Tacoma, and I tighten it down. You don't really want to ratchet that thing down to the point to where you stress the hinges of the tent, but you just kind of want to have it taut enough to where it keeps that floor of that tent from going upwards. Another benefit of doing the ratchet strap technique like that is that I set the ladder kind of get that, set stable against the ground. And then I tighten my ratchet straps so that I kind of pin the ladder in between the floor of the tent and the ground. And it really helps stabilize that ladder. That ladder is rock solid once you kind of get it pinned in between the tent and the ground with that ratchet strap. So it's even if you're not expecting weather, it really stabilizes that ladder, and it's a great technique. And I do it every single time we set up our rooftop tent at this point, whether I'm expecting the weather or not. But fast forward to April of 2023, we were at the Southeast Overland camping event that they have at Brushy Mountain in Petro, Tennessee. Really great event. We had a blast at that one, but that was another situation where we had some major weather that passed through. There was a cold front that passed through the Friday night, and we got there Friday morning for that event. And we had nearby tornadoes. There were some tornadoes that actually passed by that evening. So we had, quite a bit of rain, quite a bit of lightning. It was pretty wild there overnight. But it was Saturday. Saturday when that front was really kind of coming in. It was a cold front. We were having 60-mile-an-hour straight line winds pass through there. And a lot of people that were attending the event, they had camping trailers or they were camping in a ground tent, and they had left their base camp set up while they went to Windrock Park to do wheeling for the day. So a lot of people were not attending their camps while during the day when we were having all these winds. And the winds were brutal. These people came back by the afternoon. It was carnage around this place. There were, twisted metal everywhere from people's awnings. There were tents that blowing around like you had some of the gazelle tents were blowing around like tumbleweeds around the place. The winds were strong enough to where they knocked over all the porta potties several times over. That was fun for the volunteer crews because they had to come out and keep turning these things back upright, and the winds would just knock them right back down. So it was wild. And if you attended that event, the Southeast Overland camping event in 2023, if you were there, you know it was a pretty wild day, but a lot of people lost a lot of really expensive gear. Some of the 180 and 360 awnings that were out there that just got mangled while people weren't there in camp to watch their stuff and attend to their equipment during these winds. So a lot of damage. We were fine because I had done a few common sense preparations for that weather. We knew that there was going to be some high winds predicted for that Saturday, and I kind of had our camp kind of buttoned down. And due to the having the rooftop tent braced with a ratchet strap, our equipment came through fine. We didn't have any damage on our rooftop tent, and we made it through to Sunday just fine. So, what were some of the things that I did in order to make us so much better prepared for that weather? Well, there's some things that you can do to kind of harden your camp when you're out and it's not going to be perfect weather. And of course, the number one thing that you can do is to always put away your awnings when you're not in camp. That's a lesson, a hard lesson that some people learned the hard way on that trip. So even if you don't anticipate that there's gonna be any high winds or any kind of heavy rain or any kind of major weather, you kinda wanna put away your awnings because they're the most vulnerable part on most rigs, most people's rigs, because they're just not designed to be super sturdy. They're kind of a shade and rain protection there for part of the side of the vehicle. If it's gonna be raining heavily, and you're gonna have your awning out, you usually wanna take one of the support poles and kinda drop that down so that you angle the roof of that awning downwards to allow water to run off of it. Otherwise, the fabric of the awning is going to develop a dip in the middle. You're gonna get a whole bunch of water, a whole lot of heavy water in there, and it can actually, break your awning or cause the fabric to rip, due to the weight. You wanna stake out your awnings, even when you don't think you need to, even if you think that the weather's fine right here. We're not gonna have a problem with this. It's still a good idea to go ahead and stake out your awnings, and I stake out our awning every single time we put it out, even if the weather's calm, just simply because a freak gust of wind might come up, and that can actually send your awning flying. And this might be one of the reasons why we've had this little $99 Napa awning since 2017, and the thing's still in perfect shape, is because I take care of it by doing things like making sure it's staked out, making sure that I have it secured. And if there is any kind of a threat of weather or wind, is kind of picking up, I always put that awning away. I will always roll that thing up, put it back in the road cover. There's no need to risk having that thing damaged. So speaking of staking out, you should also stake out your tents if you're using them. So if you're in something like a ground tent, like a gazelle or something like that, we have a gazelle that we use. And one of the features of that tent is it has two layers of stake down points. There are stake down points around the base of the tent that you can drive tent stakes down to the ground. But it also has stake down lines that come out of the hubs that are midway up the walls. And those structural hubs are a really strong place to mount a, to stake that thing out. But those are put there by the factory for a good reason because they're a major part of the structural integrity of that tent. So you definitely wanted to put 4 extra stakes down and actually fully stake out that tent, because it'll make a big deal, of difference in how that tent is capable of handling any winds that come up. You want to also ensure on any tents, and this applies to rooftop tents as well, that your rain flies, they're taut on the tent. And the rain flies, in some cases, they're on some tents, they're removable so that you can take them off when it's, nice weather, or they're usually going to be fastened down with some form of buckles and straps. And even on your rooftop tent, you want to make sure that you adjust that periodically because sometimes the fabric stretches as as you use the tent, and you want to just kind of stand up on something where you can reach those and pull them taut just to make sure that you've got that rain fly pulled taut whenever the tent is opened up. Um, any kind of an excess movement or flapping of that rain fly, it can, in a heavy wind, it can cause that rain fly to tear, or as in the case of what I was worried about with that storm at Ocracoke, I was worried about that bar, that support bar, not being in its place. And I was worried about structural damage to the support elements of the tent. And if something like that were to happen, you bend a structural element of a rooftop tent, you're pretty much cooked. You're looking at buying a new tent. And those things are not cheap. So, but not only are tents expensive to repair or replace, but you got to consider they're your primary source of shelter when you're out camping. So you definitely want to take care of your shelter while you're out there. So, other things to keep in mind whenever you have some weather moving through is you want to secure your gear. And this can be anything from tables to folding chairs. You want to fold up your chairs when you're not using them. I like to, if we anticipate that this is just like a short storm that's passing through, maybe we'll fold up the chairs and just kind of put them under the truck to keep them dry. But if it's something that I don't think I'm gonna be using them a lot, I'll go ahead and fold I like to fold up our camp chairs and just go ahead and put them back on the rig where, they're usually stored, simply because if I don't think I'm gonna use it, it makes my breakdown the next morning that much quicker to already have those things put away. And, if the weather clears and we want to use them, we can just take them down. They unfold pretty easily. But go ahead and put things like your folding tables and folding chairs, go ahead and fold those up. Even if you just lay them down, they're less likely to blow away when they're in their folded mode. You want to keep any loose items. An example of this, well, this wasn't weather related, but we have a paper towel roll holder that I have attached to our bed rack with magnets. And that way I can kind of keep it in the most handy place. And it's one of the features that I absolutely love about our setup. And stupidest little $10 project. I got a paper towel roll holder off of Amazon and got some rare earth magnets. And now I can stick it to the side of the truck if I wanted. I can stick it to the bed rack, whatever. And it's kind of handy to have a roll of paper towels right where you need them. But at any rate, I had forgotten to take the paper towels off of this paper towel roll holder and put the paper towels back in the drawer. And we took off, and I'm streaming 500 feet of paper towels out the back of the truck as I'm driving down the road before I even realized that, oh man, I forgot to take. I just looked to see this trail of white streaming out behind the truck. I'm sure people were probably laughing as they passed us on the highway that hey, he didn't put away his paper towels. But so anything's like that, though, stuff that can blow away, you definitely want to secure those if you're expecting wind. And because not only if they blow away, if they fly away, not only will they not be there when you need them, but any loose gear, it becomes pollution. It's littering when it gets out when it's no longer in your camp. And we really don't want to do that to our wild spots. So definitely make sure everything's kind of buttoned up, everything's kind of put back into storage, and you don't have anything that's going to just become airborne whenever you get, some wind going through the camp. You want to make sure also that your camping spot is secure, especially when you have thunderstorms or any kind of severe weather that's going to be coming in that's going to catch you while you're out on a trip. You do not want to park under widowmakers. And what's a widowmaker? A widowmaker is a tree that has a dead limb or a tree that's, leaning and is vulnerable to being blown over by heavy winds. Anything that could come crashing down into your camp. That those are what people refer to as widowmakers, and you don't want to park even no matter how cool that campsite might look and say, "Oh, it's beautiful here." Especially in bad weather. You don't want to be parked under one of those because, a big limb could just suddenly snap from the trunk, fall down on your rig or fall down on your rooftop tent. And, you know, there you go. You also don't want to camp in low lying areas that could become a swamp or worse in the event of heavy rainfall. So, keep an eye on how what the drainage is for a site. You also don't want to be parking in like a gully or someplace that could turn into a river or something like that in the event of heavy rain. Creekside camp or riverside camps. Those rivers and creeks can quickly jump their banks in heavy weather, and they can do so unpredictably. So you kind of want to stick to higher ground, especially in a time of bad weather. Even though that creekside camp can look really appealing, you don't want to get caught in a flash flood because it could cause you to lose your equipment or your vehicle or even your life or the life of one of your loved ones. It's not worth it. No matter how great that campsite looks, find somewhere a little bit higher up to camp so that you're a little bit safer. You wanna know what your weather forecast is when you're out on a trip, and just, know if you've got, any kind of weather anticipated coming in, and kinda keep tabs on it while you're out on your trip, as much as your cell phone signal will allow while you're out there. Things like fronts coming through, those are predictable. You'll usually get a good advance heads up on those, but convection storms, like in the summertime, you get these pop-up thunderstorms. Those are not always as predictable, but they'll usually know day of, hey, we've got some unsettled weather, unsettled air over this area, and we're expecting thunderstorms in the afternoon. Just keeping tabs on something like that will give you kind of a heads up that, hey, we might get some heavy rains later this afternoon. You kind of want to know what the next 24 hours look like for all the reasons that I've already talked about. And another thing that a lot of people might not think about is that when you're in camp, you're getting some heavy rains or you're going to have some heavy winds or a major thunderstorm blow through, but you're looking around at your camp, you've got high ground, there's no widowmakers, you're not expecting any kind of flooding where you're at, and that's all well and good. You might be fine where you're camping, but what about the road that you took in to get to that campsite? What's it going to look like? Did you go through any water crossings? Those creeks might be swollen for several days after a heavy rainfall. Were there any, major mud pits that you went through that you kind of struggled to get through or slipped a lot to get through to the campsite? What are those going to look like after a whole bunch of rain? You want to keep in mind that these backcountry roads or even Forest Service roads, their passability might be impacted for days or even longer because some of these remote roads are, the crews don't get out there right away in order to fix these things after a storm. So keep in mind, especially if you have to use that road to get back out, you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're trapped. Even if you're fine where you're camping, know that you can get back out and get back home from where you're at. So another thing that you wanna kinda look at is on your gear, your tents, rooftop tents or whatever, any kind of camping gear, especially tents that you buy. These things have an engineered limitation. There's a manufacturer spec for wind resistance, and they'll say it can withstand winds up to 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour. You wanna know kinda what that limitation is for all of the gear that you're taking out with you and no and be able to compare that against the weather that you're expecting. So if the tent that you're gonna be sleeping in It's the manufacturer says it's good for winds up to 40 miles an hour, but you're expecting 60-mile-an-hour straight line winds. Well, then that tent is not going to be safe no matter how you stake it out. So keep in mind what the gear that you have, what it can tolerate in terms of wind, and make sure that you're keeping an eye on the weather and that you're not going to exceed the capacity of your equipment. There is absolutely no shame in breaking camp and heading to a hotel if you have legitimate reasons to worry about safety. If you don't think that the gear is going to stand up to the weather or that the weather is just going to get a little bit too wild for your campsite to be able to withstand, do the safe thing. Go ahead and fold the tents and head to a hotel for the night. And there's absolutely no shame in that. So by doing some of these things and maintaining some situational awareness in regards to the weather, this will help ensure that you have safe and fun camping experiences every time you go out. That's my episode for the week. I hope there were some tips and tricks in there that will help keep you and your family safe when you're out on trips. Join me back here again next week for another episode of the Dirt Road Tourist. In the meantime, I wish you and yours a very happy Thanksgiving. Have a great week, and as always, go see something amazing.